go ahead and get the ball rolling. Some kind of quick introductions, but so today's webinar really is targeted towards those that are really not using any type of dedicated technology or tools specifically for grant management and for grant making. It's kind of a broad, high-level topic here, but it's funny as we kind of started to go down this journey. We started working with organizations and kind of thinking through like what are the common ways that grants are being managed that aren't using tools like Reviewr or other kind of grant making solutions. And as we started that research and started that journey, it turned into like this deep rabbit hole of a really wide variety of tools, built-in web forms, a ton of manual emailing, paper-based processes, spreadsheets, trying to repurpose other platforms. So association management software, CMSs, Salesforce, databases, you name it. Workflow management tools, Smarter Sheet, Trello, Monday.com, Microsoft Drive, Access, all that kind of fun stuff. And so initially we kind of came into this thinking, why don't we just kind of take all these common processes and break it down to three experiences, the submitter experience, the operation experience, and then the review and selection experience, and kind of run through a common use case without these tools and kind of the negative impacts it has on an organization. As we started to do that, though, it became extremely overwhelming, especially trying to mimic a common grant process using spreadsheets and Google Drive and emails, et cetera. And so we kind of gave up on that. We are still going to kind of run through that stuff, but we're going to be a bit more visual today and kind of showcase, the negative impacts of using these tools and then how it kind of translates into a dedicated grant management software and the many, many benefits it provides. I think it's kind of timely and it's a good topic in the sense that we tried to mimic these processes and we physically couldn't do it. So for those of you that might be running their grants through a combination of these tools, my heart goes out to you because I can now physically see firsthand how overwhelming and comprehensive it is. So I'm going to kind of go ahead and get into some kind of quick introductions about who I am and what we're doing here at Reviewr, and then we'll kind of get into the main topic today. Again, there's kind of three core areas of focus. There's going to be the online grant submission applicant experience, which kind of does bleed into the post-selected deliverables, so grant reporting templates, ongoing data collection from the grantee. The operation side of things. So I probably many of you on the call today, the day in the life of managing these applications, creating workflows, communicating with applicants. And then what I feel is probably the most impactful, important component to a grant, which is going to be the review and selection side of things. And again, the reason why we're having this conversation is, we do thousands of organizations work with us. And on a day-to-day basis, I hear, we have teams that do this, or we have processes in place, or we have online tools already that are meant to run our grants. And again, what that really means is that they're, collecting applications through fillable PDFs, they're uploading it to Google Drive, they're exporting it into spreadsheets and kind of back and forth. And so I've heard that enough times now to kind of talk through why that probably isn't the best way to run a grant and kind of what the light at the end of the tunnel or on the other end of the rainbow actually looks like. And again, not to get too deep into Reviewr today, but obviously that's kind of the main goal is to kind of transition those outdated manual processes into a platform like us. So kind of my quick introduction. So we built the company back in 2012. We actually built a Reviewr backwards. And the reason why I say that is we built it from our own firsthand volunteer experiences as part of these review committees. And I use the term funding opportunities broadly because it could be grants, it could be scholarships, it could be investments. But we were the team that actually had hundreds and hundreds of binders being physically mailed to us. And we were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores. We'd have the in-person meetings, the phone calls on Saturdays to kind of justify the grant recipients. And as you can imagine, it was extremely overwhelming. The problem for us, though, actually occurred when organizations went online. That's actually why we built the company, is because we started to see organizations spin up WordPress websites with built-in web forms, and they'd have applications come in through email with a bunch of attachments. And so we were on the other side of that. So we were having Google Drive links sent to us. We were told to go download all the applications. We were told to go to this master spreadsheet and kind of add our comments and our notes and then send it back. And as a volunteer, it actually was significantly more time consuming and challenging with that process than the physical paper. Because at least with the binders, although they're very heavy and manual, they were centralized. Now we're using like 8 different tools that are really unintended for the task at hand. And we started to see kind of two really, really terrible things pop up that we'll kind of get more into. Number one is that we started to see submissions land in spam filters. So we have heard horror stories of organizations that sat down, they went through entire review and selection processes, they cut checks that are literally changing people's lives. And they're finding out months later that there are a handful of applicants in the spam filter or supporting documents and material that never even got included in the review and selection process. So obviously, from a compliance perspective, it's very problematic. But at the end of the day, we're mission-driven organizations. That's not what we set out to do. We started to hear that, with the spreadsheets being passed back and forth and the built-in formulas, that maybe results are being kind of negatively manipulated on accident, and that actually would influence the selection process. And then really concerning, we started to see very firsthand review committee members who are taking unfair biases towards applicants, whether or not it was, information about them that they didn't agree with, if it was personal relationships that they had with that applicant themselves. But that unfortunately bled into their review process, which again made unfair review processes. So these are the things that popped up over and over again. That's why we built Reviewr as an online platform that's really intended to run that entire life cycle from literally start to finish with two main goals. Number one is how do we help you and your team spend less time and energy, on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. when you should be focusing on your family, with all the other kind of things that are going on. And then number two, and probably equally, if not more important, is how do we elevate the experience for the applicants and the review committees and the board members and the volunteers and all the other people that come into play. And the best part about what we do here at Reviewr, specifically my job, is yes, the technology is backed and it's time tested. It's going to do exactly what I say it's going to do. It's a world-class software, but it's a platform that was built by the people for the people. So over a decade now of experience, every component and thing that we have within our tool set is brought to us by our existing clients that say, hey, here's processes and things I'd like to do, or here's some emerging trends that we're starting to see. And then we then take that, build it into the platform. But more importantly, is we share that information with all of our other clients and also, on webinars like this, with kind of two main goals. One is to kind of bridge the gap between your brain and then also bridge the gap between both our brain as well as kind of our deep portfolio of clients who are doing things in a very innovative manner. So that's kind of how we got to this point today. So everything that we're going to kind of look at and all the features and tools, again, are built by the people for the people, and dictated for you guys. So with that said, let's kind of jump into the first topic today. And it's going to be, again, I try to break this into three core sections: the submission experience, the operational experience, and then the review and selection experience. And I'm not trying to throw any other companies under the bus or processes. At the end of the day, there are a handful of tools out there that are built specifically for grant management. And if we're not using any of those tools, then everything that we're going to talk about is likely going to be relevant for you. So on the submission side of things, you can kind of fill in the blank. It could be why, Google Forms are not an okay way to collect applications, why using Jotform or collecting things through physical paper or through email or for built-in web forms. At the end of the day, if it's not Reviewr and or another kind of grant management software, there's a lot to be left on the table on the grant application side of things, from an operation perspective, as well as from an engagement perspective and what the applicant's experience looks like. Because at the end of the day, these are life-changing opportunities. People are applying funding for, it could be a society, for a project, it could be for individual needs, but it's a life-changing opportunity, and we have to think of them in that type of manner. So as I kind of move on here, I'm going to kind of jump into Reviewr here in just a little bit, but I want to kind of talk about some of the negative impacts that we start to see. Again, if you remember that story of the lost applications that came in through email, that's kind of at its premise why we can't be using kind of the more popular web-based forms or fillable PDF. So the most common way that organizations that are not using grant management software are collecting applications is kind of two ways. It's a combination of fillable PDFs, and then also kind of your generic built-in web forms, your SurveyMonkey tools, your Jot forms, etc. So starting with the fillable PDFs, I mean, at the end of the day, it's 2024. Fillable PDFs are popular and they were cool back when MySpace was cool. And I'm starting to date myself as I make those types of comments. But overarching wise, it's just an incredibly complex way to run a grant program. You're relying on grant applicants to go to a website, download a fillable PDF, and then we're making the assumption that they even have the ability to interact with it. So accessibility is becoming a big concern. They need to download like Adobe Acrobat and all these other type of tools. They have to learn how to, fill in the fillable PDF. They have to learn how to save the information. And then at some point, they have to export it and then return it back to you. So from an applicant perspective alone, it's incredibly overwhelming and time consuming. And it just, again, it's a very outdated manual process. Now, on the trail end of that, from your team's perspective, we lose all the ability that we have to track progress. So 80% of applications in a typical grant program that have a deadline are going to come in the last 2 days. So if that is the case, you at this point, since people are downloading, exporting, and now using kind of their own manual processes, you have no way to track the progress. There's no way to send built-in reminder messages. There's no way to gauge how many applicants you might receive, which might impact the amount of judges that you have to recruit to help with the review process. It also doesn't allow for any type of document collection. So typically when I see a fillable PDF, it either gets emailed into you directly with a bunch of attachments, or there's some type of built-in web form, which we'll kind of get into, that they attach it to with all the other supporting documents. So then the question is, okay, is it going to go to a spam filter? Do I have to download all of these documents and then merge it with the fillable PDF or the online application? It's not going to be mobile responsive. And then at the end of the day, when your team goes to conduct a review, it's going to be extremely inconsistent, right? It's going to be Word formats, it's going to be PDFs. How do you get it from your staff and your hands to the review committee? I really didn't get into like data security and privacy, but also how are we transmitting very private and sensitive data? So if these grant applications have budgets, or even things like W-9s, right? Are we really expecting people to key that into a fillable PDF and then attach it through email? It's possible, but I would be very concerned over what that looks like as far as kind of your own internal compliance and data security terms that you have for your applicants. Graduating from that is going to be your online forms. And I don't actually feel like they're that different whatsoever. You have your Google Forms, your Jot Forms, your surveying tools, and to an extent, they are absolutely more user-friendly from an applicant's perspective. It visually looks a lot better. They're able to interact with it on the website. There's no downloading, there's no exporting. They can just fill in their information. But from an operations perspective, you still lose the ability to track progress, both from your perspective and the applicants. They can't save, they can't log out, they can't come back later. I'm based out of Lincoln, Nebraska. So as we kind of are in the midst of thunderstorm season, if I lose power, I'm out of luck. I just lost all my hard work. And again, from an operations perspective, you have no idea, how far I've made it. You can't send me messages. You can't send me reminder messages. Typically, these built-in web forms are going to be extremely generic, which for some programs might be okay. But for some of the more robust grant applications where you have like conditional logics or triggers or automations, like none of that can be powered through a typical online web form. And again, from an applicant's perspective, they just fill out a series of questions. And it's not the worst experience for them. But it does pose then a significant amount of time and energy from your team's perspective. And again, when you get into things like downloading of documents and managing them, sure, you can take the files in, but what are you going to do with them? So once you get all these grant applications that came in through, say, for example, Jotform, you're still going to have to download them, export them, figure out what files go with what. If you're using like a process that has like a reference requests or things that are coming in from a third party, you have to merge them all together. And then again, now they're sitting either on your hard drive or within Jotform. There's no way to physically get them to your review team, which is kind of a future discussion that we're going to have. The last piece I want to kind of talk about here before I preview this is data security and privacy. Again, at the end of the day, these are grant programs. They're extremely confidential. Anything that deals with funding needs to be treated with extreme caution. And while some of these tools might say that they're SOC compliant, so SOC 2 Type 2 is kind of your industry gold standard, and they very well are. Once you start to use other tools or processes in conjunction with them, you lose all the data security and privacy that you're kind of being touted for, right? So yeah, you're collecting information in a very secure, confidential manner, but then once you export them, put them into a spreadsheet and send off to the review team, that goes out the window, right? So the way to think through these programs, again, why I'm trying to focus today on the applicant experience, operation experience, and then the evaluation experience, is they all do kind of go hand in hand. They have to be conjoined and they have to be connected. So with that said, I do want to kind of show you what this could look like both outside of Reviewr and then in Reviewr. So what I did is I grabbed kind of two different applications here. So this, and I'm trying not to show any logos of who it is that's running these programs, but this is an example of a grant program with a fillable PDF, right? And so we're relying on applicants to self-select and do all these different types of checkboxes. As you can see here, I can kind of start to type stuff in, but I have no idea how to save this. Like, I think I'm interacting with it on the website, but you can tell that I'm using kind of Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. Like, if I press the save button, am I going to lose this information? I have no idea. But as I get down here deeper into like affected areas, descriptions, budgets, like how awful would that be if I get to the very bottom and I press save and I didn't actually preserve any of this? So what I would probably do is I probably export this. I put this into like Adobe Acrobat and then do it there because I know I can save it. But then when I'm all done, I have to download, I have to export it, and I'm going to email it back to you. When I found this, I also found that the organization is asking for a bunch of supplemental documents and materials. So it actually says when you're done, send it to xyz@gmail.com and make sure you also attach all your supporting documents. So now, before we get into the operation side, put yourself in that individual's shoes. If they have 100 applications, they're going to get literally at least 100 emails, likely more, because this person might say, hey, I made a mistake. Here's my follow-up information, or I forgot to send you this attachment. So they're going to get hundreds and hundreds of emails. They have to figure out what belongs to who, download all the deliverables, repackage it back up, and then what happens next. As we scroll through here, you're also going to see that we have tax EIN numbers, legal name information, budgets. All of this stuff is what I would consider to be PII or confidential data. And so again, I'm doing this in a web browser that's going to get exported and emailed back in. That, from an applicant's perspective, should be extremely problematic, especially as people are being more kind of aware and of data security and their own kind of personal web footprint, we'll call it. So I think we can probably all agree that there's probably a better way of running a grant application than fillable PDFs. So what's like the graduated step from this? And it's going to be like your job forms. And I'm on purpose hiding the top of this page, which has a logo of who is doing it this way. But from an applicant's perspective, this looks physically much better, right? I'm able to interact with it. I can type things as I go. It visually looks kind of nice. The challenge with this, though, is I'm asked to write mission statements in these tiny boxes. I can't save, I can't log out, I can't come back later. I have no kind of transparency or next steps or any expectations. And it's extremely long. This goes on forever and ever and ever. There is a file upload at the very bottom. But again, and I'll get more into like how you manage the operation side of things, but like what type of file is this for? Is there a size limitation, right? Like there's so many negative impacts that we're going to run into that we just don't know quite yet, but I'll show this to you in a little bit. So again, visually speaking, this looks a little bit better. It's a web form, but as we all know here, there's so much more to a grant application than some type of very similar, and these are just text fields, right? So what does this potentially look like within Reviewr? So everything in Reviewr starts with the concept called a profile, and it's an extremely powerful process. I'm going to go back one more time to this or this example. Because what happens if this individual gets selected for a grant and now you need them to come back and submit to you grant reporting templates or updates or any budgets? What's going to happen is you use some type of tool to collect the front end application, but now you're going to get a bunch of kind of disconnected follow-ups for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. So that brings us back to Reviewr, which is a concept called profiles. So if you think through all the moving parts to a grant, you have submission forms, you've got initial submissions, and then you've got long-term data collection. You've got file uploads of a wide variety. You've got potentially references, you've got PDFs, you have budgets and spreadsheets. You might even have multimedia. As these applications come in, you're going to go through some type of review and selection process. There's might be communication that's occurring back and forth, multiple phases of processes. So the general idea behind a profile is it'll hold on to all of those activities into one centralized hub. So on the front end, you still may be using an online submission form to collect some of the data, but all those other 8 or 9 components I just referenced get kind of consolidated into one hub. So what does that look like for you? So applicants come in, they create their profile. This is right away is going to show you some things that like you just physically can't do in your job forms or your built-in form builders, and you absolutely can't do in your available PDFs. And that's going to be kind of adaptive workflows. So for a lot of our clients that we work with, their grant programs have highly specific eligibility or criteria, or they might offer a significant number of opportunities that the applicants don't even know which ones they're eligible for or that they even exist. So what you could actually do is you can ask your applicants, hey, do you want to pick what grant you're applying for, or do you want to use our matching tool? And then from here, the applicants can answer a series of questions. And behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of automated logic that's happening. It's what I call intelligent automation. That's basically going to say, hey, based on what you just submitted, maybe you're not eligible to proceed on. So you're saving them heartache, right? By filling out forms that they have no chance at receiving. It's saving you and your team time by automatically vetting applicants, right, that aren't going to be qualified. But also, it's going to say, you know what? Based on what you just put into the system, these are the 3 grant opportunities that you best align with or that you match. Which of or all of them do you want to apply for? And then based off of that answer, it's actually going to update all the subsequent pages, right? So the application forms, the workflows, the judging committees, all that stuff is now going to be a personalized experience based on what they just chose. So it seems simple. It was like what, 3 slides, but there's a significant amount of logic that's going on there. We are in the next slide going to get into like the operation side of things. But on the back end, we're starting to create categories of applicants. We're starting to pair them up with different people. We have dates and deadlines that are going on here. So a lot of behind the scenes magic that's occurring. So as your applicants progress on, again, this is a very common type of grant application. Again, you have tax ID numbers. These are all going to be encrypted fields, right? So you can have confidence that you're collecting very private data, secure, sensitive information that will never leave the tool. But the applicants come in here, they put in information about themselves. And then this is, again, a very common application where you've got grant funding requests, you have project summaries, project details, budgets that are being uploaded. Again, we're collecting a whole bunch of information here. The best part about this is 2 things. One is this as an applicant, they're not going to be able to do this in one sitting, and we shouldn't expect them to do that. So they're going to be able to save, they can log out, they can come back later. When they log back in, they can just pick up where they left off. If they were to lose power midway through here, it's going to auto save and pick up where they left off. So again, just it seems simple, but it's such a good experience for the applicants because at the end of the day, we have to lower the barrier for them and we have to empower them to focus on the content creation that's going to kind of equip them for success to receive funding. And we have to lower the barrier so that way they're not concerned about, did you get it or not? Did it go to spam? Am I going to lose my information midway through? All those types of things. As the applicant kind of goes on, they can upload file uploads. I'm going to show this to you later on. So the beauty of a platform like Reviewr that you can't do in these other platforms or these other kind of manual processes is once you upload a document, what happens next? So kind of a little foreshadowing and a little teaser, all of those files get actually embedded in Reviewr, which means that when you and your team go to view this person's grant application, you can physically view their budget or watch a video or look at a multimedia file and not to leave the system whatsoever, which again, I will show that to you. We're going to come back to this, but in this example, we're collecting references. This again is a super powerful component to our platform that you're not going to see probably anywhere else, but specifically in like your built-in web forms or clearly your fillable PDFs. So kind of moving on here. This example has more file uploads, more short answers, more essays, online e-signatures, right? So acceptance agreements. And then once the applicant submits, again, this is where, like going back to our examples earlier, if I fill out like a built-in web form or a job form and I submit, I'm going to get some type of broad thank you message and that's it, right? There's no communication. I have no idea what the next steps are. And for a fact that if you're using a fillable PDF and I email it to you, then like what happens? In Reviewr, once I as an applicant submit, I get dropped into my portal. And everything that you see here, I'm not going to get into today as far as like privileges because this is configurable by your team. But I can view my application. I can view the status of it. I can actually communicate. So I can receive one-to-one communication from you and your teams. You can see here that I have a significant number of attachments. And if I press view next to one of them, you'll notice that that document embeds itself right in Reviewr. So it kind of consolidates everything into one hub. If I jump over to supplemental forms, this is the reason why I pulled this example is because what happens if this was a grantee that in 6 months has to submit a grant reporting template? All they simply do is log back into their profile. They can see everything that they've done up until this point. They can go and click add new, and they can pick what type of deliverable that you're requesting from them. From here, they would just pick, say for example, grant reporting template. They would then be able to fill it out directly within Reviewr. So again, this is like an update to their project. So more file uploads, more metrics, more descriptions. And then once they're done and they submit this, boom, it gets attached right back to their profile where they can physically see it. So again, we started with fillable PDFs and job forms, and now we're looking at a full comprehensive grant profile that has their submission forms, their file uploads, their supplemental documents. As I kind of progress on, if you remember, we were collecting references. If you are an organization that is collecting external references about a grantee, this is where the magic happens. So you can put in like the name and email of who the reference is. It can actually trigger an email notification to them saying, hey, Paula, you've asked for a reference on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so. Once you click on that link, it's actually going to bring you directly into the reference request. So this is for a side conversation, but we are very anti-reference letters. Instead, send references to a template, which we can talk about in the future. But the reference would actually interact directly with Reviewr. So they fill out their reference request, they could upload their files, and then as soon as they submit their reference, it gets attached back to the applicant's profile, where again, if you press view, it'll embed it on there. So again, I'm going to continue to reiterate this, but a very common without Reviewr grant application process consists of generic built-in web forms, fillable PDFs, and emails. It's a one and done. I fill something out and I submit it. In Reviewr, we're taking all the submission activities that go with a grant, initial submission forms, ongoing data collection from the grantee, communication, file uploads, and everything gets stored and centralized in the applicant's profile. And you, of course, will be able to control privileges of who can access it, when they can access it, if you even want to allow edit capability, things like that. Again, we can kind of go down this rabbit hole in its own webinar by itself, because what happens if you receive somebody's grant application and then now you need them to make updates or edits? Do you really want them to submit to you another email or another fillable form? Or do you want them just to come back into the system, unlock their profile, allow them to edit, trigger a status change? It'll notify you once the updates have been made, and then you're well on your way, right? So all of these things become realities in Reviewr that obviously you can't do without a dedicated grant application system. So with that said, I don't want to go much further on the application side of things. I think hopefully we can all agree that there's a better way out there than fillable forms and email. So moving on, from an operation perspective, again, at the end of the day, like I've been in your shoes. I feel the things that you're going through. You're collecting potentially hundreds of grant applications. You're expected to communicate with them. You have to create dates and deadlines. You have to create multiple phases. There's workflows involved. At some point in time, you need to take all those grant applications and deliverables and then share them with your volunteers or your staff for some type of review. You need to build what I call leaderboards, right? So how do the results actually come back? And then you need to collect ongoing data from them. So how do you actually manage that process? And to answer that question is, I don't know. I have heard that a lot of organizations, again, are using their built-in web forms, they're using SharePoints, they're using like Monday.com or these kind of interactive project management tools. They're using their CRMs like Salesforce. And I just can't quite wrap my head around how they can manage these grant processes within those tools. Because what's going to end up happening is, yes, you can collect the applications and you can store them, but then there's no actual ability to interact with the files, to do communication, to send them to the review team, to generate reports. It just won't scale. So kind of thinking through this, like as much as that we all love a good spreadsheet, it's just not a way to store grant applications. And I've heard that organizations that are collecting grant applicants through like email or for fillable documents will export the grant application kind of content and they paste it into a row in a spreadsheet. And so for every grant application that they receive, they take all the content that they got and they just basically put it into its own row. So eventually you have a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of rows, and then every column is the data associated with them. There is so much potential human error from copying and pasting, deleting cells, losing formatting, and again, we can't just be managing through spreadsheets. It's also really fragmented. So you've got data living in all these separate places. So if you ever wanted to go to generate a report, like how are you going to do that? Because you can only run a report off of where the data lives. So you're running reports in spreadsheets, reports in Salesforce, reports on other tools, and trying to merge it back together. Again, running into the exact same issue of trying to merge all that kind of stuff together. We're also talking about potentially hundreds and hundreds of hours. And we've got some data that kind of backs us up about how much time is spent from an operation perspective, but it comes out to be hundreds of hours and tens of thousands of dollars of administrative cost just trying to manage disconnected tools and processes. It's the person that has to go home on a Wednesday and instead of spending time with their family at 9 o'clock at night, they're exporting, they're downloading, they're recompiling, they're moving data out of their systems and putting it into like constant contact just so they can send an email reminder or an email blast to the applicants. And then again, when you're moving data back and forth and trying to manage it in so many different places, what's happening if it's private sensitive data? Like, are we comfortable copying and pasting social security numbers out of an email into a spreadsheet? I'm not even comfortable collecting a social security number in an email to begin with. So these are all things we have to kind of think through. So this is, again, kind of where the magic happens with Reviewr. I did pull a job form example just to kind of help you visualize. I do think that this is one of the more common ways that these programs are being ran. And you can swap this out with your Monday.com or your Salesforce or any other kind of project management platform, is you're basically going to have a program. And from here, I can run reports, which is basically going to dump all the data into a CSV, or I can press submissions. And what this is going to do is it's going to show me a list of all of my submissions and the data that we got with it, right? So I have submission number 1, 2, 3, and 4. I can see, the date that I collected on here. I can open it up. I can change the data. It's text boxes, right? This is how I'm managing my grant applications. Again, I can export this. I can't really do anything with it. If there were file uploads, I now have to export and download those. Like, this is the project management dashboard if you're using these tools. So how do we solve that? In Reviewr, and I think right away you're going to visually tell a giant difference. You get these dashboards, and it's going to show you how many days until your deadlines, how many entries you've received. Of your entries, where are they? What phase are they in? Are they done? Are they not done? You can send built-in reminder messages to them. You can send automation. If you are using those references I talked about, it actually shows you how many outstanding references have been requested, what their progress percentage is. Do you want to send them reminders? It shows me visually right away, like all my dates and deadlines. So like, what are my key milestones? Where am I now? Where am I going in the future? If you have to open deadlines or extend things or open it back up for certain people, it's literally a one-click ability to do so. It's also going to show you recent communication that's gone on within the system, right? Everything is consolidated onto your dashboard that kind of shows you, hey, here's what's going on. And then from here, you can kind of really dive deep into the weeds. So again, I'm going to go now to show you what a submission looks like, and I'm going to go back to job form. So in Reviewr, to view submissions, you get this table, and you can sort and filter by an infinite number of parameters, the type of grant, the submission status, the phase of review, but you basically get a menu of all of your applicants. Again, going back to job form, this is what that would look like, right? So I have 4 rows here. These are 4 different applicants. In Reviewr, here's all my applicants. The difference now is to click into here, I have to click into it to view the content, or I have to read it in this small box. If I go back to Reviewr and I click on, say, for example, Leslie's name here, it actually opens up her entire grant profile. So hopefully this helps visualize that grant profile concept that I talked about earlier. So right in the center of my page, I have Leslie. Leslie is my grantee, and here's all the content we collected about her. Short answers, essays, personal information, drop downs, checkboxes, file uploads, references. Everything is consolidated into one centralized hub. I like to call this like a virtual binder concept. And then off to the right, you can actually one-to-one communicate with Leslie. Going back to like this example, you can't, like, there's no physical way. These are just forms and it's just data. They're not people. There's no personality behind it. In Reviewr, I can physically communicate one-to-one with Leslie. I can leave internal notes about her that I want my other staff to see so we can virtually collaborate with one another, yet keep it very private from Leslie's point of view. If I wanted to look at the file uploads, I would just simply click on attachments. This applicant has 5 deliverables. If I press view, again, that file will embed itself right in Reviewr. So I can kind of toggle back and forth between my note-taking tools, my communication tools, my file uploads, and my submission form without having to leave the platform whatsoever. And again, if I'm collecting external deliverables, references, grant reporting templates, all of that shows up here in a list. So I can collect an infinite number of additional documents and or submissions from Leslie that shows up here. And then I just press view, and then the contents of it shows up right in Reviewr. So thinking big picture, like, you might have grant reporting templates, references, file uploads, submission forms, one-to-one communication, multiple phases of review. All of that is logged in one simple interface. I'm going to move on to creating workflows, and then we're going to jump into the last experience, which is judging. So again, this is, again, why we built the company. It's called Reviewr for a reason. You could intertwine, if I go back to my presentation, I said why blank is not intended for grant management. That blank can be intertwined with absolutely anything. There is no way to do what I'm about to show you unless you're using a dedicated platform, specifically Reviewr, and that's create review workflows. So your processes are very broad. I know there's different types of people on the call. You might be reviewing grant applicants on a committee basis. It might be multiple cohorts. It could be phases of review. It could be multiple different types of grants. That's irrelevant for today. What we're going to talk about, though, is we're going to take a group of applicants and then we need to give it to a team for review. So in Reviewr, we have a concept called buckets. And there's automations that can put people automatically into buckets. You can do it manually. But in this example, let's pretend that we're a grant-making organization that gives out 4 different grants or 5 different grants, the Meredith Haley grant, the Lennox Wilder grant, et cetera. And there's 3 phases of review. So what happens is in Reviewr, the applicant gets automatically put into the grant that matches the one that they chose. The next step is to fill up that bucket with a review team. So whenever Simon, Paula, Mark, and Judge Judy come into Reviewr, they're physically only going to have access to the grant applications that you assign them in that bucket. At the top of my page, whenever Sally, Sue, and Steve come in, they're going to see a completely different set of grant applicants because they're in a different bucket. Now, again, this could be phase 1 review, which has like a high-level internal vetting team. Phase 2 review might be a more comprehensive judging process. And then phase 3 review might be like interviews. There's so many ways to do this. But again, what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of applicants and putting them into a bucket, and then we're filling up that bucket with a review team. When the review team comes in, they're only able to see the submissions in their bucket. Now, again, there's no other way to do this, right, outside of Reviewr. We aren't downloading, we're not exporting, we're not sending anything to our review team. All we're doing is telling them to come into the system and they're going to see what we gave them. We can even get more specific. So if I open this up, it'll actually show me a list of all of the grant applicants within that bucket, the current number of people who are supposed to be reviewing it, and then who those reviewers are. So for the sake of compliance or for the sake of kind of randomization, you can bulk select and say, hey, I want to make sure that every applicant gets reviewed exactly 3 times, or I want to make sure that my review team never scores more than 20 people, but no less than 5. The system will actually at random and evenly distribute out those submissions to your team. And then if you ever wanted to override it, or if you wanted one-to-one control, you can actually pick and choose exactly which applicants are going to be sent to what review members. So it's really, really powerful things here. Obviously, we're collecting all the grant profiles in Reviewr. Operationally speaking, you can communicate with them, you can create dates and deadlines, you can create workflows, and then all you're doing is either automatically or at random or individually pairing up these applicants with review teams. And that's kind of the next piece to this puzzle. So I would argue that this is the most important part of a grant, and it's the actual review and selection. And it's hard for sometimes people to wrap their heads around that because, you've got hundreds of applicants. Sometimes you're spending a considerable amount of review time. But at the end of the day, oftentimes your review team are A, volunteers or other staff members. There's other obligations that they have. And B, these are life-changing opportunities. We are relying on somebody to set apart some set number of time to come into a system like Reviewr, review somebody's application, give them the thoughtfulness and the time and energy that the applicant deserves, and ideally in a fair, non-biased manner that, again, will change their lives if they're selected. So that's the mentality that we have to have. So again, common ways that this is being done, uploading into like Google Drive or Dropbox a folder per applicant, and then sticking a spreadsheet in there and saying, okay, review team, now go to this Google Drive link, download the spreadsheet, go through all the different folders, export the files, log your comments, log your notes, log your scores in the spreadsheet, and then when you're done, either email it back to me or drop it back into Google Drive. That's what a very common process without Reviewr would look like. Or at least that's how I would probably do it. So with Reviewr, again, we'll kind of get into what that looks like. But again, it's arguably the most important part of managing a grant. It's often overlooked. As much as we want to save you and your team time and energy, you make up a small fraction of the volume. Applicants and volunteers and committee members make up the bulk of it. It also creates the challenge when we're trying to ensure a fair, non-biased selection. So I talked about the randomization of submissions to review teams. But with a more manual process, how do you redact information? So if you don't want your review team to see personal identifying information, name, email, demographic details, like, are you taking a Sharpie and marking it off? Like, how are you identifying that? We'll get into Reviewr here in a second, but that can all be automated. When the review team needs to conduct a score, are we really going to rely on them to kind of pen in or type in their scores into a spreadsheet and hopefully send it back? What happens if the formulas break, the rows get confused with one another? Like, that's going to impact the results. From a transparency perspective, like whatever happens if you want to share the results back to the applicants, how do you get that data out of the spreadsheets back into their hand? This has been on every single slide, but data security and privacy. Again, at this point in time, we've collected personal information through fillable forms and PDFs and email. We had to download it, we had to export it, we manually had to manipulate it and store it. We're putting onto some type of online file sharing system, and then now we're expecting our judges to download and store it offline as well. Like that's passing too many hands. Like we can't be doing that. And then from a time perspective, like this process is impossible to scale. If you only had a review team scoring 10 applicants, this is going to take them roughly about 5.5 hours. So using kind of the current volunteer hourly rate, that means that your judges are going to spend about $175 per judge. So if you have 10 judges reviewing 10 submissions, like we're literally going to save over $1,200 for each one of them. Like it's extremely comprehensive. So what does the review process look like? So as we kind of jump back into Reviewr, again, I do want to show you what this could look like outside of Reviewr. So I found this out there, and I don't want to give any names, but there's another product out there. It's a project management software. So it's used to like collect information. You can create workflows and tables, etc. This is their software. They actually have a built-in forum. And somebody said, hey, I want to create a scoring process. I want a team of 4 to score, roughly 15 applicants a piece in different categories. I want them to use score sheets. How do I do that? And a staff member from that company said, here's how I would do it. And if this doesn't overwhelm you, I don't know what will. They're telling them to create a bunch of formulas and sums and combine columns. It caused a little bit of confusion. So the applicant kind of came back and said, okay, what about doing this? So right now you have a platform that's trying to run grants, right, using these tools that I talked about, and this is how they're advising creating scores. I don't know what I'm reading here. This is extremely overwhelming to me. So in Reviewr, what's going to end up happening is you get these review workflows. So as I kind of move on here, when your review team comes into a system like Reviewr, they get a very simple menu. You don't need to rely on them going to external sites to download and export. There's no opening up spreadsheets. They just log in and they see a list. And that list is whatever applicants you want them to review. Again, if you want to redact information, that happens automatically. There's no need for you to touch it. The review team will then simply click on the name or ID of the grantee you want them to review, and then they get a split screen. So the left-hand side of their page is the grant profile. So again, I have short answers, I've got essays, I've got file uploads. All the data you want the review team is sitting here on the left. Off to the right, I have what I call a score sheet, which is obviously completely custom in Reviewr. I don't want to get too deep into that today. You could do drop downs, you could do check boxes, you could do 1 through 5, you could do weighted scoring. But the general idea here is that your review team can kind of side by side scroll back and forth in their score sheet. They can answer a series of questions. They can read through the application form. They can jump up to the file uploads. Again, they can press view and that file will embed itself. They can leave their notes. They can look at the additional forms. And then you'll notice that off to the bottom, there is self-tabulations. So again, there is no manipulating of formulas. There is no spreadsheets. Your review team is simply side by side reading and answering. When they're done, Reviewr kicks out a leaderboard. And it's actually going to show you on a per bucket basis all of your applicants, the individuals and the committees that scored them, the individual scores, the total scores, the average scores. And then from here, you can start to make informed decisions, right? So it'll rank them high, from high to low automatically. You can have deliberation meetings. You can share this out with your committee. They can kind of talk about it. You can manipulate the results if you want to, all that kind of fun stuff. There's no spreadsheets being sent back to you that require you then to kind of recompile them. Better yet is we're also now starting to identify trends. So this is more of like an advanced workflow. But again, my goal with this last piece of information is just to show you that without a dedicated grant software, there's always something that's being left that we either haven't thought about or it's going to come back to bite us in the tushy in the future. So in this example, I have Mark down here who scored 12. So my first question is like, okay, did Mark just really rate this person low, or does Mark just like never score very high? So like is on a 30-point scale, does Mark just never give higher than a 13? And if that's the case, that actually means that Mark scored this applicant extremely well. However, using traditional judging models, this applicant will never be ranked higher because Mark brought their scores down. So this is a real example here. All the data is redacted. but you can see I have a list of applicants as well as judges who scored these applicants on a per question basis. Again, this is an Ivy League university that used Reviewr for a funding opportunity, and they had found out over the years, as you can see here, that Judge Judy on average scores a 23.875. And then Tony over here scores on average about a 34. So anybody that Judge Judy ever scored never got a grant. That's the truth, right? This is a real example. Anybody that that person reviewed never got selected. They were really good applicants, they just never got selected. So now we can identify why. And it's just because on average, Judge Judy scores almost a 10 points or 25% lower than anybody else. So now that we know this and we've been able to identify that in Reviewr, at least we have these reports that will normalize the data. And it says, okay, well, instead of being a 23.875, that's now a 1, because that means you were scored exactly average by that judge. If you scored higher than an average, you got higher than a 1. If you scored lower than average, it was lower than 1. And now you're taking each individual judge's personal averages against each other. So in this example, this is again real data. Bruce Banner is our grant recipient who scores on average 1.15 times higher than average. Elon here scored an 8.83, which is almost 2/10 of a point lower than average. So again, extremely powerful stuff that is only going to be found in a dedicated platform that runs thousands and thousands of these programs off a wide variety of industries every single year. So with that said, I do want to open this up for any question and answer. Yeah, so the question came in like, will reporting be covered? Like that's for a separate conversation. Again, I want to talk about like the 3 core components to like a process: the submission experience, operational, and then review and selection. Reporting would be an operational component, right, to a grant. And that's, again, where you don't have reporting capability if you're using a combination of web forms, downloading of documents, emails, spreadsheets, Google Drive, money.com, etc. And the reason why that's impossible is that you have data living in a bunch of different places. And if you are able to generate reports or combine stuff, there's no confidence in the data because you're manipulating it and you're exporting and recompiling it. So within a platform like Reviewr, we have infinite reporting capability because we own, let me rephrase it, you own the data, but we own the entire process from start to finish, from the initial grant application to post-grant reporting templates to the review and selection to the communication. All of the data from end to end lives in one centralized hub, which means that if you want to generate reports, you just have to figure out and pick what do you want to report on. You can combine data. You can take data from like multiple phases of review and put it together. You can get contact, like whatever it is. It's all realistic because the entire data set, right? The entire process lives in one spot. Yeah, so the question that came in is there a process for gathering supporting details? So invoices, proof of payments, all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, and that goes back again to like the beauty of the concept of a profile because what would traditionally be happening is whatever tools and processes are in place now to run the initial grant application process is now segmented. So you have initial applications and people, and then you've got everything else, which is going to be your scoring, your selecting, your communication, and then your ongoing data collection. And the one thing I want to avoid happening, right, is people then saying, hey, I appreciate the grant. Now, in 6 months from now, here's my invoice or here's my proof of payment, right? And it's all happening through email back and forth. So in Reviewr, all that ends up happening is the applicants, I'm going to go back to the submission experience. The applicants would come back into their profile. And for you, you can have them do one of 2 different things. Either A, they can go to their attachment section and then just simply upload it, right? They can upload the invoice or the proof of payment, or you can upload it if that's what it's for, or if it's a very dedicated process within your workflow. So for example, we work with an organization that funds individuals of need. And they need to submit like a receipt, right? That's going to get reimbursed for, it could be housing costs, it could be for utilities, whatever it might be. And in that use case, they either upload the attachment here or they go to the supplemental form section and they pick from a drop down the type of form it is. They might pick proof of payment, invoice, receipt. And then as soon as they select it, it drops them onto a form to capture that data. And that form could be a simple file upload, right? It could be an image, it could be a screenshot, it could be a full comprehensive grant report template. But the idea is they submit it directly in Reviewr, and then once it gets added, it just falls directly into the profile. And then whenever your team or the review team comes in to look at it, you just press view, and then the contents of what they submitted shows up directly on their profile. So again, that profile holds on to not just their initial submission form, but also communication, results, activities, as well as any potential future data collection needs, either from the applicant themselves or that's being submitted about them by your staff. So yeah, the question that just came in was, can you combine submitted forms to compile a larger report with multiple grantees. Very, very complex to do in general. And again, that's kind of, I think, where platforms like Reviewr shine. And I know this was my answer to your first question about reporting being covered. The answer is as long as the data all lives together. And that's the key is like you can't have any disconnected data or processes because then you lose any ability to do this. But because all the data lives into one centralized hub, I'm not going to get too deep in the tech, but our custom report building allows us to target any data set and then combine it and merge it. So, for example, we have an organization that we work with where let's go back. So we work with some cities who do grants for the American Rescue Plan. And literally, once that organization is selected for a grant for the next 4.5 years, every single month, they have to submit a grant reporting template. Every single month, the grantee comes in and they submit a supplemental form, which is their grant reporting template. And then the data from their initial submission form and those grant reporting templates in real time powers a dashboard. So the community, the voters, can go and look at who was funded, progress of funding, the impact that they're having, the social impact, all that kind of stuff. So again, yeah, as long as the data all lives together, it can get merged, it can be combined, it can get put into admin reports, all that kind of fun stuff. Really appreciate your time today. If there's anything that I can do ever, please do let me know. I appreciate it.